This is not really all we speak about. This is what we're most known for because I think it's the most controversial. I've been kicked out of synagogues for no other thing than encouraging people to convert. That's the main thing. It seems like they could tolerate you questioning the authority of the Zohar, but if you try to encourage people to become Jewish, that's when you start affecting them. That means that they have to put up with people you bring closer. I had a discussion with someone yesterday on how I choose to approach potential converts. And I think this person speaks for the vast majority of Jews. The traditional opinion, traditional in the sense of maybe in the last 200 or 300 years, that one has to be extremely careful who they let into the Jewish people and how they let them in. Because if the person you draw near does not pan out at the end, you are in some way harming the Jewish people spiritually. I'm not just saying because of the results, the physical results of having someone, let's say, assumingly he's still identifying with the Jewish people and he's doing evil in the world. Is that the case? Is this the way the rabbis in the Talmud viewed it? I don't think so. There aren't too many examples in rabbinic literature in general that speak on how to accept converts. There's really a handful of them, perhaps that I know of, maybe 3 or 4. The most popular one is that instance that Hillel is confronted 3 times by someone who wants to convert. Some people say it's the same guy. Some people say it's a different person. And in every one of those instances, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the notion of teach me Torah while I'm standing 1 foot, convert me on the understanding that you make me the high priest. Well, anyways, on those 3 instances, he converts him miyad. He converts him right away, and then he teaches them. Why didn't he ask the question to himself, how can I accept this person right away without seeing if he's really serious, right? Because he's clearly coming under the wrong auspices. Now, Hillel didn't care on what auspices he was coming on because he knew that once he heard the truth, that was going to be enough to square him away. And it seems that he would gamble the other way as well. That, you know what, if for some reason after I converted him, if he really didn't want to continue becoming Jewish, it wasn't an issue either because the rabbis in the Talmud, just like the sentiment in the Torah, they held that a Jew who doesn't keep Torah is not Jewish. Now, yes, he's halachically Jewish, but he's not in any covenant with God. The problem we have nowadays is that we elevate secular Jews, atheistical Jews, as still part of that covenant and as still special to God by calling them Jewish. In Talmudic times, I'm sure they would never call an atheistical person with a Hebrew pedigree Jewish, especially in front of Gentiles. The guy's an atheist, the guy's pushing all these unethical ideas, and you're going to claim him as your own. You're saying that in some way he speaks for you or on behalf of you, or he is part of you, either spiritually, physically, or ideologically. So that's the big difference with people today and people back then. So it's true. If we're going to continue elevating ethnic Jews, biological Jews who are not religious, to the same level as religious Jews, then of course you should worry because someone out there is going to continue considering this person who dropped Torah Jewish. And then, yes, the religious Jews are going to end up dying for the sins of the secular Jews. And this happens all the time. When there are anti-Semitic attacks nowadays, they're typically not because Jews are religious. It's typically because Jews are irreligious. But when an anti-Semite is looking for a Jew to kill, he's going to look for the one who looks Jewish, because a Gentile cannot tell the difference between a secular Jew and a religious Jew. We could tell the difference, but they can't. So this is how we die for their sins, not in some spiritual way, in a practical way. The concern is valid from their perspective, but that doesn't mean that we have to alter the law because they've chosen to include every secular Jew as holy and part of God. They've changed. The Torah didn't change. I think the most important point that I failed to mention right now is that being Jewish doesn't mean anything. Converting to Judaism doesn't mean anything, really, in God's eyes. By the simple fact that somebody could be born Jewish means that having the title Jew means nothing. It's what you do before and after you receive that title. The day you guys decided to follow God, to follow Torah, that's when you became his Am Segula, his treasured people. It's not after you converted. There's many rabbis who make this big deal, like you're a Jew now after you convert, and now it's like you have this relationship with God. It's like, excuse me, I've been religious way before I converted to Judaism. I walked with God back then. I don't feel that I'm worshiping a different God. I mean, it's still the God of Israel. That's the God I fell in love with. His laws are the ones that drew me to himself, to this philosophy. Okay, I dropped JC, and now I have a kosher understanding, but it's not that we came from complete darkness to the correct path. I felt part of Israel when I decided to convert, not when a rabbi said, okay, it's time to go to the mikvah. It's because people make no distinction between what's legal, i.e. halachic, and what's metaphysical, which is very important. But many people think that I'm against the metaphysical. No, I'm against the metaphysical that doesn't stem from the Torah. The Torah is a very metaphysical book. I mean, God is spirit. He's not flesh and blood. We relate to him on an emotional and spiritual level. So that's what's important. The relationship that you have with the Creator that drives you to want to emulate him, that makes you want to love him even more when you realize that he didn't have to give us a higher standard to aspire to. He didn't have to give us the Torah, but he loved us so much that he did. Conversion is just part of the formalities. This is what you do. It's equivalent to trying to move to the U.S. If for some reason being American was a religion, only because you got that piece of paper that says you're a citizen doesn't make you feel more American. No, what makes you feel American is identifying with the values of the country, with the founders of the country, with the Constitution. Okay, a piece of paper is not going to solidify who you already know you are. And it's really the same thing with Judaism. It's not a coincidence that conversion doesn't appear in the Torah. But this experience, that experience you had when you came to the realization that Torah was true and the God of Israel was true, that's what it's describing. The Jews on Mount Sinai crying to God saying, yes, yes, we will do and we will listen. Just give us more. That's not a conversion process. That's far from it. The halachic procedure that was developed by the rabbis, which is fine. I mean, it could be developed by the rabbis and still binding and obligatory as part of our legal system. That was just there for you to make a public declaration, not to God, but to the Jewish people. It's making a public declaration of what God already knew in your heart before you even visited a rabbi, that this is the path where you want to be on. This is the philosophy you want to push. Now, being that the Jewish people can't know what's in your heart, God knows what's in your heart. They have to test you. They have to sometimes put you through the ringer. But they shouldn't torment you. I mean, it's a mitzvah, and the Torah says, Hager lo tone, you shouldn't torment. But that's what conversion is. It's making a public declaration to people who don't know you that you are socially entering their community. That's all it is. There's nothing spiritual about it. This is why it says in the book of Isaiah, it says, let the Nochri not think that God would exclude him from his covenant when he keeps the Sabbath, when he circumcises himself. So being in a covenant with God is not the same thing as converting to Judaism. There's many people who are halachically Jewish who are not in a covenant with God, and there are people who are in a covenant with God who are not halachically Jewish. Why? Because the Torah doesn't talk about being halachically Jewish. I understand that you can't run a country without having checks and balances of who's a Jew and who's not a Jew. That's clear. This is why the court had to step in, the elders had to step in, the court had to create checks and balances of who we're going to consider a Jew. But the Torah, according to the Peshat, it just speaks about tribal lineage, and that goes to the father. But even tribal lineage does not really carry any spiritual weight, with the exception that there are certain offices that God designated to tribes, predominantly 2 tribes, because the notion of kings coming from Judah is not in the Torah. It's Levi and Aaron, but Aaron is from Levi. From Aaron come the Kohanim, and the temple workers come from Levi. And a king, according to Torah, could come from any tribe. The Rambam brings down in Hilchos Malachim that a king could come from any tribe. But Mashiach must come from David. But not that any king must come from David. This is why the Maccabees were able to be kings, even though they were Kohanim.
Yeah, thank you for that, Rabbi. That was a great opening of the hangout. I want to thank everyone for coming by. Got a familiar faces, and we got some new faces. We have someone out there in the comment section. Blackwater is asking us, what if you do not live near a synagogue or reform is the only thing available? Big question. It's a popular question that people ask. Don't bring your MAGA hat. Don't bring your MAGA hat along.
Right, for sure. There's issues with it. I always say you're never going to agree 100% with your rabbi, for sure. Now, in a conservative synagogue, the agreement level is going to be much, much lower, probably even 5%. But there's still glimpses there of tradition that you'll miss out if you stay home. Now, what I wouldn't do is take your kids there or take your wife or anyone who's spiritually weak. Your wife could be the spiritual head of your family. Like, what do I know? But don't take anyone spiritually weak to these places because they could get brainwashed into the wrong direction. Because there's a lot of youth groups. There's a lot of messages that are going to be taught on the pulpit that contradict the Torah and could lead people astray. But I think that for people who are grounded in Scripture, who just want a taste of Jewish life, not kosher Jewish life, but clearly a Reform synagogue represents Jews nowadays a lot better than Orthodoxy does, just because most Jews are secular. Most Jews aren't religious. Now, Orthodoxy represents kosher Jews and kosher Judaism a lot better than Reform does, but it gives you a taste of how Jews are socially, and that's very important. I think getting along with Jews and speaking the lingo and is very important just to fit in, and that's something that you'll learn in a Reform synagogue. And I'll tell you, they're pretty welcoming in Reform as long as you don't have right-wing beliefs. But if you're there to learn, they're initially very welcoming. I think that, again, if you're religiously strong, I don't think it'll hurt you. And religiously mature, again, mature means that you're able to go to a synagogue and know, I disagree with this rabbi 90% of the time, but I'm here for that 10%. I think that takes a mature religious approach. But most people don't want to enter a synagogue where they don't agree with the rabbi at least 90% of the time. And I think that is the right approach if you're going to take children or people who are new to religion, because it's just going to hurt them. There are no easy answers to tough questions. So it's very subjective. It depends on the person. Heck, I worked for some time in a conservative synagogue, and you'd be surprised how many Messianic Jews actually go to conservative synagogues. And I'm pretty sure these Messianic Jews are probably a lot more religious than the average conservative Jew.